A Manhattan townhouse just shaved $10 million off its price. At the same time, the city's cash register posted the largest first-quarter outflow on record. That cut was surgical. A 5-story, 5-bedroom townhouse at 34 East 62nd Street dropped from a $35 million ask last year to a $24.5 million tag today. The same address traded for $18 million in 2021 after once asking $32.5 million. In one listing, you can see what's happening across the city: sellers adjusting, buyers recalculating, and the market hunting for perceived value. The details of this one home-bowed French windows, a limestone facade, a rooftop with a fire pit aren't what makes it a signal. The numbers do. Zoom out to the city's cash flows. During the first quarter of fiscal year 2026, New York City collected $34.696 billion and spent $39.234 billion, a net cash outflow of $4.538 billion. The city began the quarter with $12.229 billion on hand and finished with $7.690 billion. Average daily receipts clocked $542 million. Average daily expenditures ran $613 million. Receipts barely budged, up 0.3% from a year earlier, while outlays climbed 8.4%. Both totals were the highest for any first quarter on record. Tax collections told a split-screen story. Total tax receipts hit $22.36 billion, up 8.3% year over year in the quarter, but the pieces moved in different directions. Property tax receipts rose 5.3%, a $578 million lift. The base that tax sits on citywide taxable billable assessed value grew 5.39%, reaching $308.516 billion in the final fiscal year 2026 assessment roll. That is the city's bedrock revenue, and it grew. Non-property taxes rose 11.7%. Personal income tax, inclusive of the pass-through entity tax, surged 18.7% on stronger withholdings and a large reallocation to the city in September. The unincorporated business tax gained 12.2%. Payments in lieu of taxes rose by $380 million, a jump almost entirely explained by a $375 million remittance from the Hudson Yards Infrastructure Corporation in September. Utility taxes were up 11.6%. The big three: electricity, gas, telecommunications did their part. Sales tax revenue grew 6.8%, above the city's September inflation rate of 3% year over year. Hotel occupancy tax added 4.8%. Occupancy held near last year and roughly 3% below pre-pandemic levels. By September 2025, revenue per available room stood at $378. Up from $363 a year earlier and $345 2 years earlier. On the commercial side, rent tax revenue increased 3.2%. Leasing demand strengthened as more employers pushed for office attendance. That's part of why one of the city's largest office landlords publicly projected that low vacancy would keep falling. There isn't much new office product in the pipeline, and the towers that exist are competing with amenities, from immersive event spaces to destination restaurants. But the market's gears grind where deals close. Mortgage recording and real property transfer taxes fell 16.1% versus the same quarter a year earlier. The reasons were specific. In Manhattan's luxury market, roughly 60 to 65% of all transactions closed in cash, which skirts the mortgage recording tax entirely. That high cash share props up closings at the top while reducing the city's take. Below the top end, high mortgage rates kept many buyers on the sidelines. The city's own summary put it plainly. Sales activity was mixed, with strength at the luxury tier and constraints elsewhere. Those constraints show up as price reality, one listing at a time. At that Upper East Side townhouse, the ask dropped by $10 million to $24.5 million. It was bought for $18 million in 2021 after a prior ask of $32.5 million and first returned to market at $35 million last year. The seller's view? This is a different environment, and winter requires more aggressive pricing. A recognizable name, yes, but the recalibration is what matters. At the same time, the city's hospitality metrics kept climbing. In September 2025, revenue per available room was $378. That was $15 above September 2024 and $33 above September 2023. Occupancy was steady year over year and still about 3% below pre-pandemic. That stability helped lift hotel occupancy tax revenue by 4.8% for the quarter. Sales tax receipts, up 6.8%, outpaced the 3% inflation rate in the metro area as of September. On the street, the city feels busy. In the ledger, it is spending like it. Spending is where the story gets heavy. First quarter cash expenditures reached $34 billion, the highest first quarter total on record, up 8.4% from the year prior. Remove capital, and you still see a 9.9% jump in net expenditures. Personnel costs totaled $15.447 billion, up 6.8% year over year. Payroll alone rose 6.3%, tied to previously ratified labor agreements and a larger workforce. As of September 2025, the city employed 290 to 1,394 active workers, up from 285,871 a year earlier. The Department of Education did much of that hiring. To meet the state's class size requirements, the DOE boosted full-time pedagogical staff by 2,968 since July 2025. For the current school year, the DOE hired 6,292 new teachers versus 4,822 over the same period last year. Fringe benefits rose 7.7%. Health insurance spending hit $1.963 billion, up 11.6%. Pension costs reached $2.603 billion, a rise of 5.8%. Taken together, personnel and benefits alone accounted for $18.05 billion in the quarter. Other than personnel spending moved faster. This category vendors, services, social support climbed 15.2%, 17.6, $1 billion. The biggest increases were in public assistance and social services, up 31.1%. Within that, spending on homeless shelters at the Department of Homeless Services rose 24.7%, from $811 million in the first quarter last year to $1.012 billion this year, in part reflecting larger advance payments to nonprofit providers. City HEPS, the rental assistance program designed largely for individuals and families experiencing homelessness, expanded from $228 million to $383 million, up to 63.3%. Spending on childcare vouchers jumped 106.7% to $316 million, driven by expanded income eligibility and higher market rates, which raised per-voucher costs. Cash assistance stayed roughly flat at $751 million. The number of New Yorkers receiving cash assistance stood at 601,757 in September 2025, up from 573,112 in September 2024 and just below the recent peak of 602,894 in July 2025. Emergency spending for people seeking asylum eased from last year's peak but still mattered. Q1 migrant-related expenditures totaled $785 million, down from $1.094 billion in the prior year's quarter. As of October 2025, 32,856 asylum seekers were in the city's shelter system, down by 45% from 59,898 a year earlier. The footprint of large emergency relief centers shrank sharply. Facilities managed by NYC Health Plus hospitals housed 2,880 people in October 2025, down from a peak of 25,810 on April 14, 2024. Funding flows traced the same arc. H+H received $401 million for these centers in the first quarter of last year versus $23 million in this year's quarter. Migrant-related vendor spending on food, medical care, and other essentials totaled $149.4 million, down $120.2 million from a year earlier. Elsewhere, in all other outlays, the city dispersed over $1.2 billion to senior colleges in the quarter, helping push lump sum expenditures $531 million above the year prior. Add it up, and you can see why cash went out faster than it came in. Debt service management and capital flows added complexity. In the quarter, the city retained $1.471 billion of property and personal income tax revenue for general obligation debt service. Back in June 2025, it prepaid $3.787 billion in debt service for fiscal year 2026 to balance the budget, $1.443 billion for GON, $2.344 billion for the Transitional Finance Authority's future tax-secured debt. Prepayments have been tapering for several years, from $6.114 billion in fiscal year 2022 to $5.479 billion in fiscal year 2023 to $4.397 billion in fiscal year 2024. Capital expenditures totaled $3.727 billion in the first quarter, down 3.9% from $3.879 billion a year earlier. Reimbursements for capital outlays contributed $3.292 billion to the central treasury in the quarter. That lagged capital reimbursements, trailing eligible capital spending by $334 million, added to cash outflows. Over the last 10 first quarter periods, reimbursements averaged 101% of capital spending. This year it was 92%. The borrowing plan for fiscal year 2016 is sizable. The city expects to issue $15.525 billion of new money across general obligation TFA future, tax-secured, and municipal water finance authority bonds. In the first quarter, it placed $2.750 billion, leaving $12.775 billion projected for the remainder of the year. The transactions were straightforward. A TFA future tax-secured sale labeled 2020 6 Series A included $1.5 billion of tax-exempt fixed-rate bonds and $200 million of tax-exempt variable-rate bonds for net new money of $1.764 billion. A GO 226 Series ABC sale mixed $950 million tax-exempt fixed-rate new money and $100 million tax-exempt variable-rate new money, with refunding tranches of $585 million tax-exempt fixed and $256 million taxable fixed. The net new money was $1.092 billion, and the refunding saved $35.3 million. A third transaction, TFA Building Aid refundings, sold $1.390 billion tax-exempt fixed-rate bonds and achieved $112.8 million in budget savings. These aren't just bond desk notes. They are the plumbing that funds the capital plan and sets the city's financing costs in a market where tax receipts are shifting. Back on the ground, the office market remains a character in the story. Prominent owners have argued that low vacancy will continue to fall because the pipeline of new towers is thin and existing supply is differentiating with amenities. That thesis fits with the city's 3.2% rise in commercial rent tax revenue in the first quarter and the observation that leasing demand is strengthening as more employers adopt stricter in-office requirements. It also fits with the hospitality numbers room revenues of $378 per available room in September 2025 because office attendance bleeds into restaurants and hotels. In Midtown East and the Penn Station District, the marquee buildings are leaning into attractions, immersive observation decks, fine dining rooms, and chef-driven anchors that draw tenants and tourists alike. Yet the health of real estate on the street is never just about towers. Policy choices can change buyer psychology. Prominent brokers and business owners have warned that allowing tent encampments on sidewalks would impair quality of life, discourage buyers from laying down roots, and harm storefronts that rely on foot traffic. The city's chief executive-to-be became the focus of that debate as of late November 2022. State leadership publicly opposed the idea of letting people sleep on sidewalks or under bridges, calling instead for a mix of enforcement sweeps when needed and pathways into supportive housing, mental health care, and substance use services. For the market, that amounts to attention. How the city balances compassion, order, and budget trade-offs will shape block-by-block perceptions and, in time, pricing power. Meanwhile, the national wind is shifting. One set of forecasts calls for mortgage rates to average about 6.3% in 26, down from an average of 6.6% in 2025. Existing home sales are projected to reach 4.13 million that year, up less than 2% from an expected 4.07 million in 2025. Another forecast pegs sales nearer to 4.3 million, roughly a 4.3% gain on rates, hovering just above 6%. Across the largest 100 cities, prices are expected to dip in 22 and rise modestly in 78, with a median gain of 4% in the rising group. In the southeast and west, some of the pandemic's hottest destinations are projected to cool. One Florida corridor, a Cape Coral to Fort Lauderdale, could see the sharpest decline on the order of 10.2%. Northport Sarasota Bradenton is modeled lower by 8.9%. 7 of Florida's 8 largest cities are expected to see prices fall, with Miami as the exception. Why mention those national figures in a New York story? Because the city's own first quarter numbers tell you exactly where the friction is. Transfer-related taxes fell 16.1%. High-end cash purchases make up 60 to 65% of deals in the luxury market, and non-luxury demand was held back by mortgage rates. If borrowing costs ease toward the low sixes, signals suggest the non-luxury side of New York's market could see buyers re-enter, tightening days on market and lifting the city's transfer-related revenues off the mat. If they don't, the divide cash-fueled deals at the top and slower movement everywhere else persists into 20-6. The city's receipts carry other signals. Sales tax, up 6.8%. Outpaced inflation at 3% in September 2025. Utility taxes, up 11.6%, reflect activity in electricity, gas, and telecom. Hotel occupancy tax revenue, up 4.8%, lines up with RevPAR improving from $345 in September 2023 to $378 2 years later. Payments in lieu of taxes leapt by $380 million, including a one-time $375 from Hudson Yards development engine. Personal income tax climbed 18.7%, with a big pass-through reallocation supporting that line. These pieces aren't anecdote. They are a composite portrait of a city that is spending into growth, financing long-lived assets, and navigating a housing market that is moment by moment redefining value. Consider the real estate pipeline that underpins those numbers. Capital expenditures at $3.727 billion in the quarter keep the build-out moving. The plan to issue $15.525 billion of new money this fiscal year, of which $2.750 billion is already done, signals a city leaning into its capital program. Refunding savings of $112.8 million on school-related bonds and $35.3 million on GO bonds matter because they free dollars for priorities like classrooms, shelter capacity, or street safety. And the debt service prepayment rhythm down from $6.114 billion to $5.479 to $4.397 in recent years, before this June's $3.787 tells you that budget maneuvers are thinner. Less federal COVID-related aid, too. $297 million in the quarter versus $2.487 billion in the first quarter a year earlier, when pandemic aid still padded cash flows. Receipts, excluding capital reimbursements, actually fell 2%. The ambulance effect fades. The operating engine must carry the weight. On the housing side, the city's transfer tax slump has context. The luxury market's 60 to 65% cash share in Manhattan shelters it from mortgage costs and the mortgage recording tax, a detail that reduces city revenue on each high-end transaction. In the non-luxury tiers, high rates held buyers back. That's how you get a headline listing recalibrating by $10 million while the overall tax base holds steady. The property tax base, $208.516 billion in taxable assessed value, is indexed to assessments, not closings, and it rose 5.39%. That base provided a steady 5.3% revenue lift. The rest of the ledger is where the volatility sits. Corporate activity added its own cross-currents. General corporation tax revenue fell 9.4%, with weakness concentrated in finance and insurance, trade, and manufacturing. That dip offset some of the power from personal income, sales, and utilities. The city also retained $1.471 billion from real property and personal income tax revenue for GO debt service in the quarter, up from $903 million a year earlier, which directly shapes the net cash number. When you're balancing the books, small fractions of big numbers matter. Every data point here rolls up into a narrative about how New York real estate trades through 26-23. On one street, a high-end seller resets an ask to $24.5 million and looks for a smaller pied-à-terre after making Jacksonville his primary home. On another, a business owner near Union Square worries that sidewalk encampments could scare customers away. In the skyline, office landlords invest in amenities and expect vacancy to slip lower given thin new supply, while commercial rent tax receipts rise 3.2%. Downtown hotel revenues reached $378 per available room in September 2029. In payroll offices, the school system adds 2,968 pedagogical staff since July and brings on 6,294 new teachers for the school year. In the budget office, cash assistance serves 657 New Yorkers in September. City HEP's spending rises to $383 million in the quarter, and migrant service costs ease to $785 million as shelter counts fall by 27,042 year-over-year. In the bond market, the city locks in $148.1 million in refunding savings across 2 deals and lines up $12.775 billion more in new money issuance for the rest of the fiscal year. This is what a complex market looks like. One where the tax base is growing at 5+% even as transaction-dependent taxes fall by double digits. One where hospitality is solid but a few beats shy of pre-pandemic. One where office leasing is climbing with lifestyle perks. One where the social safety net expands with childcare vouchers doubling year over year to $316 million and rental aid up 68.3% to $383 million. One where debt service is smoothed by prepayments of $3.787 billion in June, but relies less on extraordinary federal aid, $290 to $7 million in the quarter than it did a year ago, at $2,480 to $7 million. So, what happens next? Base case through calendar year 2026 looks like this. New York enters the year with a steady property tax base, $308.516 billion in taxable assessed value, up 5.39%, and robust non-property tax momentum in personal income, sales, and utilities. The office market grinds forward, consistent with a 3.2% rise in commercial rent tax receipts and a view from major landlords that low vacancy will continue to fall given limited new supply. Hospitality holds its gains, with RevPAR in the high 300s, $378 in September 2025, supporting occupancy taxes. On housing transactions, an easing in national mortgage rates toward the low 6s would, if realized, give the non-luxury side a shot at re-engagement, while the luxury segment continues to lean on cash, maintaining a 60 to 65% cash share in Manhattan's high end. In the city's ledger, expenditures continue to outpace receipts, but bond issuance of $15.525 billion in new money for the fiscal year and refunding savings of over $148 million help fund capital and ease pressure at the margins. Watch 2 things closely. First, monitor the trajectory of mortgage recording and real property transfer taxes over the next 2 fiscal quarters. They fell 16.1% in the first quarter. Any move toward stabilization would likely coincide with a shift in mortgage rates toward the 6.3% national average that some forecasts call for in 26, a pickup in existing home sales toward 4.13 to 4.3 million nationwide, and locally, a retreat of the luxury market's 60 to 65% cash share. If those 3 things align, you'd expect more finance deals, more activity in the non-luxury tiers, and a lift in the city's transaction-based revenues. Second, track the city's policy choices on street encampments alongside the shelter system's metrics. The number of asylum seekers in shelters fell to 32,856 as of October 2025, down 45% from a year earlier. Spending on sanctuary shelters rose to $562 million in the quarter, driven in part by advance payments. City HEP's outlays rose to $383 million. Childcare vouchers reached $316 million. Leaders across business and real estate have warned that visible encampments could depress buyer interest and storefront sales. State leadership has stated opposition to allowing sleeping on sidewalks or under bridges, favoring enforcement and connections to supportive services. How those decisions interplay with budget priorities and safety will ripple into neighborhood desirability and, step-by-step, property pricing. A final note on the price cuts that started this story. One listing isn't a market, but when a home goes from $35 million to $24.5 million after a purchase at $18 million in 2021, it tells you a seller is meeting the moment. When hotel revenue per room moves from $345 to $378 over 2 Septembers, it tells you travel and business have found a rhythm. When personal income tax receipts jump 18.7% and sales tax rises 6.8%, it tells you paychecks and shopping are flowing. And when transfer taxes fall by 16.1%, while the cash share of luxury deals sits at 60 to 65%, it tells you financing costs still matter. Stitch these figures together, and the path through 26 comes into focus. Steady at the base, selective at the top, and sensitive to rates, receipts, and rules on the street. If you want more data-anchored stories of how this city really moves, come back for the next one.